The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Rosie's Diner on the edge of Carmel by the Sea, California. Clint Eastwood hadn't come here to be recognized. He'd come for the silence, for the black coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since 1952, and for the kind of peace you can only find in a place where nobody cares that you once filled movie screens across the world. But on this particular Tuesday morning in October, that peace was about to be interrupted by a boy in a cowboy hat. And what happened next would remind Clint why some roles you never stop playing, even when the cameras stop rolling. Nobody in the diner had noticed the old man in the worn leather jacket when he'd walked in 20 minutes earlier. The waitress, Maria, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that had poured 1,000,000 cups of coffee, had simply nodded and brought him his usual without asking. Black coffee, no sugar, and the morning paper folded to the crossword puzzle. Clint's fingers, still steady despite the years, held the pencil with the same quiet precision he'd once used to draw a revolver in dozens of westerns. The diner smelled of bacon grease and toast, of old wood and older memories. This was Clint's ritual, the one thing that kept him grounded when Hollywood parties and award ceremonies felt like they belonged to someone else's life. But rituals, he'd learned over 8 decades, have a way of being interrupted when you least expect it, and most need it. The boy appeared so quietly that Clint didn't notice him at first. One moment there was just the scratch of pencil on paper and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. The next moment, a small shadow fell across the crossword puzzle. Clint looked up slowly, the way he'd learned to move in his old age, everything deliberate and measured. Standing beside his booth was a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, drowning in a brown cowboy hat that kept sliding down over his eyes. The boy wore jeans that were too short, showing mismatched socks above scuffed sneakers, and a t-shirt that had been washed so many times the cartoon character on it was barely visible. But it was the boy's eyes that stopped Clint cold. They held something that didn't belong in a child's face, a kind of exhaustion mixed with desperate hope, the look of someone who'd already learned that the world doesn't give you anything for free. The boy pushed the hat back with one small hand, revealing a face covered in freckles and a smile that was trying very hard to be brave. "Mr. Eastwood," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I know you probably get bothered a lot, and my mom says I shouldn't bother people when they're eating, but I needed to talk to you." The words came out like he'd been practicing them, but still wasn't sure he had the courage to say them out loud. Clint set down his pencil and studied the boy the way he'd studied 1,000 scripts, looking for the truth beneath the words. The diner seemed to grow quieter, even the clatter from the kitchen fading into the background. "Son," Clint said, in that familiar gravelly voice that had narrated westerns and whispered threats to bad guys, "I'm not eating anything but this coffee, and it's terrible anyway. Sit down." He gestured to the seat across from him, but the boy hesitated, glancing toward the door as if checking something. "My mom's outside," the boy explained, his small hands fidgeting with the edge of his hat. "She doesn't know I came in. We were just walking by, and I saw you through the window, and I thought maybe." He trailed off, the brave smile faltering for just a moment. Clint could see through the window to where a woman sat on a bench outside, her coat pulled tight despite the morning sun beginning to burn off the fog. She looked tired in the way that goes deeper than missing sleep, the kind of tired that comes from fighting battles you know you can't win, but keep fighting anyway. The boy followed his gaze and spoke again, faster now, as if he might lose his courage. "Mr. Eastwood, I want to be a cowboy, just like you were in the movies, because cowboys protect people, and they're brave, and they always know what to do when things are hard. And I need to be a cowboy because—" His voice cracked, and he pushed the hat back again as it slipped forward. "Because my mom needs help, and cowboys help people, right?" Clint had heard a lot of things from fans over the years. He'd signed autographs in restaurants and airports, had people tell him how his movies changed their lives or made them want to be actors, or taught them about justice. But something about this boy, about the weight he was carrying in those small shoulders, cut through all of that. "What's your name, son?" Clint asked, his voice gentler now. The boy straightened up a little. "Tommy, sir. Tommy Price. I'm 8 years old, and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly 12 times. My grandpa had the DVD, and we used to watch it together before he—" Tommy stopped, swallowed hard. "Anyway, that's how I know you're the best cowboy there ever was, and I figured if anyone could tell me how to be a cowboy, it would be you." Clint felt something shift in his chest, a familiar ache that came from recognizing yourself in someone else's story. He'd been young once, desperate once, looking for answers in all the wrong places. Maria appeared with the glass of orange juice, setting it in front of Tommy without a word. She caught Clint's eye and gave him a small nod, the kind of unspoken communication that comes from years of watching people and knowing when something important is happening. Tommy looked at the juice like it was gold, but didn't touch it. "I can't pay for that," he said quietly. Maria waved her hand dismissively. "On the house, honey. Drink it." She walked away before Tommy could protest, leaving the two of them in their corner booth while the diner slowly filled with the breakfast crowd. Clint leaned forward, his elbows on the table, studying the boy who wanted to be a cowboy. "Tommy, before we talk about cowboys, I need you to tell me something. When you say your mom needs help, what kind of help are we talking about?" The boy's fingers tightened around his hat, knuckles white. "We got evicted, Mr. Eastwood." "That's a fancy word for when you have to leave your home because you can't pay the rent anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and real. Tommy rushed on, as if saying it fast would make it hurt less. "Mom works 2 jobs, at the diner on Pacific Avenue and cleaning houses, but it's not enough since Dad left. He just left one day and didn't come back. That was 2 years ago. Mom says he had his own problems and we shouldn't hate him, but I think I do a little bit. Anyway, we were staying with Mom's friend, but her friend's boyfriend said we had to go, so now we're living in our car. It's a 2004 Honda Civic, blue, with one of those bumper stickers that says, 'Visualize world peace,' that won't come off no matter how hard you scrub." The specificity of that detail, the way Tommy described the bumper sticker, made it somehow more real, more heartbreaking. Clint had played tough guys who didn't show emotion, but sitting across from this boy in a too big cowboy hat, he felt his jaw tighten with an anger that had nothing to do with movies. "Mom doesn't know I know," Tommy continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "She thinks I believe her when she says we're on an adventure, camping under the stars. But I'm not a baby. I hear her crying at night when she thinks I'm asleep. I see how she pretends to eat and then gives me her food instead. And yesterday I found the notices from the school saying if we don't have an address soon, I might not be able to go back." He finally looked down at the orange juice, and when he looked back up at Clint, his eyes were bright with tears he was fighting hard not to shed. "So I figured if I could be a cowboy, a real one, I could protect her. I could make money and get us a place to live and make sure she doesn't have to work so hard anymore. That's what cowboys do, right? They save people?" The question hung in the air, and Clint realized with crystal clarity that this moment, this conversation in a forgotten diner on a Tuesday morning, mattered more than any scene he'd ever filmed. Clint Eastwood had stared down fictional villains in saloons, had delivered justice with a squint and a drawn gun, had played men who never flinched in the face of danger. But sitting across from Tommy Price, an 8-year-old boy in a cowboy hat who thought the solution to homelessness was becoming a movie character, Clint felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Helplessness mixed with a fierce determination to do something that actually mattered. He reached across the table and did something he rarely did. He placed his weathered hand over Tommy's small one. "Son," he said, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly weight, "let me tell you something about cowboys that the movies don't always get right. Being a cowboy isn't about the hat or the gun or riding off into the sunset. It's about showing up when things are hard, about doing what's right even when nobody's watching, about protecting the people you love with everything you've got." Tommy listened, his eyes wide, and Clint continued. "And you know what? You're already a cowboy, Tommy. You're already doing all of that." Tommy's face crumpled for just a second before he caught himself, blinking hard against tears that wanted to fall. "But I'm not doing anything," he whispered. We're still in the car. Mom's still sad. I can't fix anything. Clint squeezed the boy's hand gently. You're 8 years old, and you walked in here to face a stranger because you thought it might help your mom. That takes more courage than anything I ever did on a movie set. But here's what I learned after 8 decades on this earth. Sometimes being a cowboy means knowing when to ask for help, and sometimes it means accepting help when it's offered. He paused, letting those words sink in. Tommy, how would you and your mom like to not sleep in that car tonight? The boy's breath caught, hope and disbelief warring on his freckled face. What do you mean? Clint pulled out his phone, the movement deliberate, and made a call while Tommy watched with wide eyes. Morgan, Clint said into the phone. I need you to do something for me. There's a woman named Price, works at the Pacific Avenue Diner and cleaning houses. She's got a boy, Tommy, about 8 years old. They need a place to stay, and they need it today. He listened for a moment, then continued. No, not a shelter. The guest house at the property. Furnished, utilities on, and I want it ready by this afternoon. Also, call Linda at the Community Foundation. Tell her I'm personally backing a family, need job placement assistance, and school enrollment help. Whatever it takes, Morgan. Yes, I know what I'm doing. Just make it happen. He ended the call and looked at Tommy, whose mouth had fallen open. Mr. Eastwood, we can't, that's too much, Tommy stammered. Clint shook his head slowly. Son, I've made a lot of movies in my life, played a lot of tough guys. But you want to know the truth? The real cowboys are people like your mom, working 2 jobs and keeping you safe and loving you through the hard times. She's the hero of this story. Maria had been watching from behind the counter, and now she approached with a knowing smile. I'll get the boy some breakfast, she said softly. And maybe you should bring his mother inside, Mr. Eastwood. She looks like she could use some coffee and some good news. Clint stood, feeling every one of his 80-something years in his joints, but also feeling something else. Purpose. He'd been going through the motions for a while now, winning awards and giving speeches, and wondering what any of it meant. But this, helping this boy and his mother, this felt real, in a way nothing had felt in a long time. Tommy, he said, go get your mom. Tell her an old cowboy wants to buy you both breakfast and talk about a job opportunity. As Tommy ran toward the door, his too big hat bouncing with each step, Clint called after him. And Tommy? Keep the hat. Every cowboy needs a good hat. The boy turned back, a smile breaking across his face like sunrise, and nodded before disappearing through the door. 20 minutes later, Sarah Price sat in the booth across from Clint, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, tears streaming down her face as he explained what he was offering. A place to stay in the guest house on his Carmel property, help finding stable employment through his foundation's network, and assistance getting Tommy enrolled in the local school with proper support. I don't understand why you're doing this, she whispered, her voice broken with emotion. We're nobody. You don't owe us anything. Clint looked at her, then at Tommy sitting beside his mother, orange juice forgotten, watching the 2 adults with barely contained hope. Ma'am, Clint said, I've spent my whole life pretending to be a hero on screen. Your son just reminded me what real courage looks like. The least I can do is what any decent person should do when they have the means to help. Besides, he added with the hint of a smile, I need someone to take care of that guest house. And Tommy tells me you're pretty good at cleaning. 6 months later, on a spring morning that smelled of ocean, salt, and possibility, Clint sat in that same booth at Rosie's Diner, working on the crossword puzzle. But this time, he wasn't alone. Tommy slid into the seat across from him, no longer wearing a hat 3 sizes too big, but a properly fitted one that Clint had given him for his birthday. The boy's face had filled out, the haunted look replaced by the brightness that belonged in a child's eyes. Mom said to tell you dinner's at 6, Tommy announced, pulling out his own newspaper. She's making that pasta thing you like? Clint nodded, watching as Tommy carefully unfolded his paper to the comics section. Not the crossword yet, but getting there. Sarah had taken a job as office manager at the Community Foundation, was taking night classes in accounting, and had recently moved into a small house of her own, though she and Tommy still visited regularly. "Mr. Eastwood," Tommy said, looking up from his comics, "I've been thinking. I still want to be a cowboy when I grow up." Clint raised an eyebrow. "That so?" Tommy nodded seriously. "Yeah, but not the movie kind. The real kind. The kind that helps people. Maybe I'll be a teacher, or work at a shelter, or do what you do, helping families who need it. That's what real cowboys do, right?" Clint felt that familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it was different. Not pain, but pride. Pride in this boy who'd walked into his quiet morning 6 months ago and reminded him that the best roles we play are the ones that happen off-screen, in diners and guest houses and ordinary moments that change everything. "That's exactly what real cowboys do, son," he said quietly. "And something tells me you're going to be one of the best." Outside, the California sun burned away the last of the morning fog, and through the diner window, Clint could see the ocean stretching endless and blue. He'd made a lot of movies about heroes and justice and doing the right thing when it mattered most. But sitting in that booth with a boy in a cowboy hat who'd saved him as much as he'd saved the boy, Clint realized that this, right here, was the role that mattered most. Not the one they'd remember him for in Hollywood, but the one that Tommy would carry with him forever. The role of showing up, helping out, and proving that sometimes, when a kid asks you how to be a cowboy, the best answer is to show them that they already are one. If this story reminded you that kindness costs nothing but means everything, that heroes are made in ordinary moments, and that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion create the biggest changes, then this story has done its job. Real courage isn't about guns and glory. It's about an 8-year-old boy in a too-big hat asking for help, and a man wise enough to recognize a hero when he sees one. The best westerns aren't always filmed in dusty towns with showdowns at high noon. Sometimes they happen in diners on foggy mornings, over black coffee and orange juice, when someone decides that being a cowboy means showing up for people who need you most.